Hi, you guys, Dave Mad Max 6, and we're back with the doc. By popular demand, everybody's been asking, what's going on? I don't see any more new shows. What the hell's going on? You guys are taking too long, and Doc's has been busy, I've been busy, but we're back now, and we're going to get started right away. Good to see you, Doc.
Good to see you, too.
All right, so here's a question from a female. I have read or heard conflicting information regarding the use of testosterone or any hormone for treatment of menopausal and premenopausal symptoms in women, such as lower energy level, insomnia, weight gain, etc. Even question different doctors, their response on the benefits and danger of hormone replacement therapy vary. What, in your opinion, is best for treatment of such symptoms for the average woman? So when we're not talking about bodybuilder, but just like a regular,
No, that's an easy one. I mean, hormone replacement therapy has been proven time and time again to ease the symptoms of whether we call it pre or perimenopause or menopause and postmenopause. Once you reach age 35, by definition, the hormones start to drop off, a little bit per year, a percentage per year. And of course, everybody's different, and different factors can affect that, such as stress, exercise, and all kinds of things. So it's an odd question in the sense that it's not, people ask me sometimes, well, do you believe in hormone replacement therapy? As though it were a religion or something. There's science behind this. Does it relieve the symptoms? Absolutely. And if you have symptoms and we show that your testosterone levels are low, then through replacement therapy we can rid you of the symptoms, which are typically, and you can't compare yourself to other people around you. That's not a fair comparison, because a lot of, for example, energy or libido is mental. So everyone's different, and your energy level may be different than mine, etc. So the best comparison is, how do I feel, say, energy-wise compared to how I did 10 years earlier? And if you're feeling like, okay, I'm not as energetic, my libido is not the same, body composition changes are...
What about lack of sleep? Because I know this person was actually asking me the question. I'm not going to say who it is, but she's complaining about having a lot of hard time sleeping at night. Is that a factor?
I see that a lot, actually, because testosterone tends to give you a sense of well-being. Hey, everything's okay. Remember when you were 16 and something was bugging you, you got up in the middle of the night to urinate, for example, and you said, shut up, brain, I'll handle it when I wake up in the morning, right? When you don't have that sense of well-being, usually you fall asleep exhausted from worrying too much, let's say, or whatever you're doing. And then once you go through a standard 4-hour sleep cycle, you wake up, and as soon as you have the energy to start worrying again, you do so, and you have trouble falling asleep or not being able to get back to sleep at all. Yeah. So it can further anxiety in someone who really wasn't necessarily ever prone to it, just because you don't really feel that, hey, everything's okay, I'll handle it tomorrow type thing. So I see that a lot.
Wow.
But in terms of, the basic symptoms, the question being, does it work for the average person? Absolutely. I mean, we've had the evidence since at least the 1950s.
Why do you think that some MD will just be against it? She says, basically it's contradictory based on what you read or what.
Well, I'm responding to her question in piece, in the sense that I'm answering using only one hormone, testosterone. But hormones, there are many hormones, but the ones we're talking about, the sex hormones, the ones that are included in sex hormones, are the ones that are made from cholesterol, typically pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. So I just picked testosterone, but I think a lot of the problem with prescribing estrogen is based on some of the studies. One of the most famous is the Women's Health Initiative, and they pick on estrogen, and for good reason. They were using, I say for good reason, the estrogen type they were using. In the study, they were using Premarin, which is short for pregnant mare urine. And in Premarin, it's a horse, obviously, derived urine. It's equilin. And equilin is at least 1,000 times more potent on the human uterus than human estrogens are. So you can imagine there might be some problems when introduced into the female system. So we had an 8 in 10,000 increased risk of estrogen-sensitive cancers, an 8 in 10,000 increased risk in stroke using Premarin. So doctors who try and stay up to date and are aware of the studies point to it and say, hey, you know, when we give you the estrogen for hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, you're running this increased risk. Well, that's true. The studies bear it out using Premarin. But and the problem, part of the problem is we don't have any major studies like were used in the Women's Health Initiative to show that using female hormones, human hormones, we don't have this issue. Anecdotally, we don't have the issue, but we don't have a major study that says, look, if you use estriol or estradiol is what they're probably going to end up using if they ever do this, we don't have the same problems. But you know, there are hundreds of thousands of females using human estrogen without these increased risks. Now, that having been said, even if you were going to use Premarin, or I would suggest, you know, even if you use those studies as a basis for fear, and you use human hormones, treat it as though you still have the risk, and you can alleviate that risk. There's something called a 216 alpha hydroxyestrone test, which gives us a gauge of the ratio of the good estrogens versus the bad estrogens, meaning the good are the ones we don't find any connection with increased risk of stroke, estrogen-sensitive cancers, versus the bad, which obviously we have the problem. And we can see that if we use a substance called DIM, diindolylmethane, which gets converted in the body to something called I3C, indole-3-carbinol, we can control that ratio. We can keep the good estrogens in play and avoid the transformation into the bad estrogens, and reduce that test to a number we're comfortable with, where we say, okay, well, you know, you don't have the increased risk, at least according to the test. So we treat it as though it still is a risk, and until we get the studies, use DIM as our defense against estrogen-sensitive cancers. As far as the risk of stroke, we can use fish oil. Fish oil,
essential fatty acids and omegas,
yeah, omega-3s, and you can even use baby aspirin if you wanted to. Again, I'm not advocating that we have to treat it that way, because again, people will say, well, it's estrogen, it's a problem. Well, and apples are apples. No. Have you ever tried a Macintosh apple and compared it to a Granny Smith apple? You know, there are differences in the estrogens. So again, we can treat it as though it still is a risk, even though we don't have any real evidence to suggest that with that particular apple, human hormones, there is a risk. So there's no reason, I guess, the bottom line, to not use hormone replacement therapy to not only ease the symptoms, but you know, improve and improve quality of life, but improve the chances against getting some of the morbidities associated with lower levels of hormones. Period.
I know that you a few shows back we talked about those testosterone gel patches for men, and we covered that subject. But I also know that you do have some sort of test cream for women as well. And that's good, right?
Absolutely.
Actually, because a lot of people just don't like to inject themselves, and so that's actually a good one.
Well, yeah, and for women it's an easy sell, because if anyone's like my wife, you know, she's got stock in Sephora in her medicine chest, you know, where they're going to put on a night cream of some sort. So I just say, hey, you having trouble remembering to put on your cream, put it right next to your, you know, oil of Olay or whatever.
And that's actually a good one. That's actually not like the men one, right? It's not
a good one
as far as the cream, because you know, I know that, you know, the one for the gel for men, you
well, the problem I have with the gels for men, the ones that are made by the major pharmaceutical companies, I don't know if you want me to name names.
No, we covered it before, but you were basically discouraging from using it because it was just too weak.
Well, it's just ineffective. Yeah, it's not at a strength which is and dosed properly to cause a benefit. But the issue that I think a lot of people are concerned with is, we mentioned bioidentical, and we talk about synthetic versus non-synthetic. These are human hormones. Are they drawn from a cadaver? No. Or produced by a live person and extracted? No. They are synthetically produced, okay, but we have technology which allows us to replicate a human molecule over and over and over again, and it's much safer than getting it from a cadaver, by the way. So it is synthetically made, but they are bioidentical. They're human hormones that we're using to replace. So no fear with that, and that's a concern I hear about a lot. I'm not sure if that's what you mean by it, but my objection to using the Testims and the androgels are not really based on the product itself.
No, the strength.
It's the idea of this is the dose you use to get. And we have studies that go back again to the 1950s that show if you're not getting to 800 nanograms per deciliter of total testosterone in a male, for example, you're not going to see clinical benefit.
Right.
And trying to do that with what is currently prescribed, the dose of Testim and androgel, it's not going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to see them get to that level. So that's my objection, if you will.
Very cool. Thank you, Doc. All right, Doc. So here's a question. Hello, Doc. First off, you are the man. I absolutely love this series. I watch every episode the day it's released, and I always share the info with my fellow gym rats.
Cool.
The question a lot of people are asking me that I really don't know 100% is, what is the best bulking stack, and why would you use each supplement in the stack? Or so this is obviously coming from a bodybuilder, obviously.
Obviously about steroids, not hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah. So what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I know I disclaim all this stuff in the videos that we produce. This is non-medical advice because it's not part of mainstream medicine. Obviously, this is more information gathered over the years by dealing with bodybuilders and being able to review the literature, knowing basic human physiology. So take all this with that in mind. This is not medical advice, but given that, my experience has shown that the basics that were around from, again, we keep going back in time, the 1950s, 1960s, are what still work the best with the guys I see doing this sort of thing, the bodybuilders. In general, bodybuilders use a base of testosterone. So you're always staying with what would be considered at least a baseline of testosterone cypionate or testosterone propionate. And then adding, for bulking phase, nandrolone, which used to go under the brand Decadurabolin, made by Watson until, well, not recently anymore, but I think in the 90s they stopped. But that is roughly 3-to-1. Testosterone is considered 1-to-1 anabolic to androgenic.
Oh, see, I didn't know that.
And nandrolone is considered at least 3-to-1 anabolic to androgenic in effect.
I see.
And so that's great for putting on, for building tissue, muscle mass for the bodybuilder.
Gotcha.
For HIV patients,
I was just
for
going to say
wasting
that,
syndromes,
right?
it's a no-brainer.
Right.
And I'm not sure if by FDA regulations it's recommended, if you will, for HIV, but I know Anavar is another very anabolic hormone, oxandrolone, an oral steroid.
Isn't it used for cutting a lot of time too?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm off track and I'm talking about the medical uses, but yeah, for bodybuilding, a lot of guys will go a bulking phase of using nandrolone. Most people say it helps their appetite a little bit as well. And then when they're trying to keep as much muscle mass as possible but lose the fat, switching to Anavar, which again is very anabolic, not as much of an effect on hunger. As a matter of fact, some people complain that it upsets their stomach, and so it's easier, I guess, to diet. And then a lot of guys will use Winstrol about 6 weeks out from a show, because Winstrol is actually indicated for angioedema.
What is that?
Holding water in the wrong places.
Oh.
So bodybuilders are always trying to get rid of the third space water, so they'll use Winstrol
to dry out.
Right, to dry out is the term. Right. Instead of and I've always said that the use of diuretics, which is happening these days in bodybuilding, is nuts.
You told me that.
Because,
recently.
did I already say this on camera?
No, you told me that personally because I just competed, you know, so you said, please don't do diuretic, please don't do that. You know?
Your muscles are, you know, that hard-earned muscle is made up of water.
Mm-hmm.
And I think guys are using it because they're not doing their homework and getting rid of all the excess fat. So yeah, you can dry out, I think is the term you use, and make the fat appear smaller, but the amount of water and fat is nothing compared to the percentage water in muscle. So you're really trading a lot of Peter for Paul. And you see it all the time when guys get on stage, they look absolutely flat. And the day before, they looked great. It's also, I mean, we all know this, and I don't mean to sound like, you know, grandpa, but it's dangerous. I mean, you know.
It's unpredictable is what it is.
Well, and guys will use too much,
yeah.
And you can run the risk of a heart attack and severe cramping and all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard it's happened to guys before, and the guys haven't been able to get up on stage because they cramped up. But aside from all that, I don't mean to come up here and stand like you know, a negative Nelly in a whatever. You know, it is my job here, so to speak, to give you the dangerous sides of these things too. But I don't want to come up as preaching. But the concept of it is just what blows my mind. I mean, you work for so long to build up the muscle, and you literally piss it away the day before the show. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. And you know, the guys of old, and you know, the era where bodybuilding, without naming names, became really famous. That era of guys will say they never used diuretics. What they did was restrict the starchy carb intake, and then a week before the show, start introducing more complex carbs and posing to try and drive the water into the muscle along with the glycogen. And of course, look more full. And you know, I think 3 days out, make it even more simple carbs, but pose to squeeze out the third space water and put the water in the cell, so you look, you know, fuller. Anyway, that's good
advice. Would you say, to go back to his question, would you say, because I know back in the days, and you know, people like Arnold actually made it very public that they would use things such as Dianabol, and I don't know if it's still around or not. I'm assuming is also a good. I don't even know if you can find that.
Dianabol is illegal. That would be considered contraband in this country. The legal steroids, legal meaning they're not contraband, not necessarily that they can be prescribed without, you know.
Right.
And that's a whole other issue. But believe it or not, halotestin is still legal, and I can't imagine why you'd want to ever prescribe halotestin.
And it's very toxic.
It's very hard on the liver, but you know, the indications, this is where I don't follow how we got here at all, the logic behind it. Anadrol is legal. It's usually used for pernicious anemia. I can think of a lot of other things to use besides Anadrol to reverse pernicious anemia. How about we find out the basis of the disease and correct that rather than just throw some Anadrol out of it.
That's very toxic too.
It can be an issue, excuse me. And then you have nandrolone still legal, oxandrolone, both hormones we've mentioned, and Winstrol is I think it's borderline. And don't quote me, but I know it's legal for equine use, and I'm not sure if I think oral versions are still legal for human use, but not injectable. Okay. I might have that flip-flop.
Okay.
But those are the ones that aren't considered contraband. Everything else, I know I hear guys are using trenbolone. That's a big one on the market because it helps you keep dry, no third space water, but still fairly anabolic. That's not considered legal.
Wow,
Dianabol we just mentioned. I don't know what are the other ones, but.
How do you know what's legal and what's not? Are you getting memos?
No. You can look it up.
Okay.
You can go to the DEA website and find out what is a scheduled substance and what isn't. Okay. What is considered contraband.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Doc.